gets a goal? Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone. Now, as I was watching this weekend, Sam, something struck me. We normally use analogies like jumping from a height when we're describing how it feels for FPL managers when the deadline hits. You've now lost all control of your team and you're simply praying you land safely. This weekend, we definitely saw that. Some abseiled off the precipice and landed on their feet, while others free fell and landed in a bit of a heap. It's much of a loss in FPL, of course, and we're already seeing wildcards popping left, right, and centre, in particular by the latter crew, even if they triple captained Holland, as was that was a key headline, wasn't it, this week? And we're seeing them everywhere now on timeline. Oof. To discuss this and many, many other things this week, I'm joined by Sam. As always, you're all right. Commiserations to the Saints for their first home game back in the Premier League.
Hey, Tom. Yeah, how's it going? Unfortunately, I don't think that'll be the last time you'll be saying commiserations to me on a Monday after a Saints defeat. So, you know, we won a few in the Championship. I've got to get used to life in the Premier League again. So I'm not going to get too upset about it. It's hardly the first time or the last that this will happen to a Saints fan. So all good there, although, you know, it would have been nicer to get off to a better start at home. In the meantime, though, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we are doing a bit more of a zoom in on the Funzone midfield. Obviously, there's a certain player on the chopping block for a lot of us, but we're widening the pool around that price point from 5s to 8.5s to look at replacements for a certain Chelsea midfielder and to see who the meta is at the moment. Lots of unhappiness surrounding the options many started with in game week 1, of course. Suspect some moves have already been made. We saw a few active last night in the community, but we also thought it was worth adding our thoughts here, both for now and in the future weeks, as it's a really important slot this season. The price point returns. We still are looking for an official name for that accommodates both of us. So if you've got any suggestions, let us know in the comments. For now, we'll keep it as price point because we're boring and uninventive. And we'll have a look at what we've been spotting with our own eyes in the games over the weekend. We'll also have a full fat Game Week 3 preview, as always, including the Kneejerk, discuss those wildcards being popped by many, and our own teams. One transfer may have already been made by one of us. Game Week 3 transfers in bringing our discussion together, and bold claims, as always, makes a return alongside the best captaincy options. It's Monday, the 26th of August. It's bank holiday Monday even, not money, although some extra would be lovely. No games, so completely unopposed. So hopefully there's a few of you in the chat today. Do feel free to get involved. In the meantime, though, shall we crack on with our Game Week 2 reviews, Tom? I think one of us is particularly happy.
Yeah, it's been a good week, honestly. But you know me, Sam, I always kind of just stay in the middle because a massive high can be accompanied by the very next week by a really kind of fatal low, effectively. So I'm not, I'm not getting too carried away, but it was a very good game week for me. I didn't triple captain in the end. I'll come back to that in a minute. But 99 points all in, up to just outside the top 50k. Dreamland really for game week 2. The last time I was this high was 2022-23, and also my uni days. But in terms of FPL, 2022-23 when I got the top 20k finish. So hopefully the portents for this are good. Returns all over the shop, basically, from differentials, especially. So Smith Rowe and Gordon with 10 points each. Wenjao Pedro, who we'll discuss later on the price point, or at least I will, scored that last minute winner. I just kind of felt like that week was, my week was going to go my way, basically. Haaland obviously counted as differential this week for a lot of people, which was obviously great. Saka and Jota with the assists. Jota could have got so much more. And Ollie Watkins' poor day at the office. On Match of the Day, they called it Ollie couldn't Slotkins, which I wasn't sure whether that was good or bad. It felt very kind of dad joke like, so that's bad, it's good kind of thing. Anyway, but that gave Riot another 9-pointer. He was an 8, and then kind of at the very end of the game week, they knocked it up to 9.
Up to 10.
Sorry, up to 10. Sorry.
Yeah.
So that kind of popped me up to 99, which is obviously fantastic, but one below where you want to be. As I said last week, and you said this as well, I wasn't quite there on triple captain. Did consider it much more than perhaps you did, Sam, based on our pre-game week conversation. But I never got above, say, 30-70. FPL General on the 59th minute was pretty persuasive about it, and so it definitely made me think about it a bit more. But I didn't do it, which obviously looks a bit silly in hindsight, but it is hindsight, and it was probably the optimal bet to make in many cases, but I'm not going to second guess the decision-making process. We said pre-season, if you're happy with that, all good. And as we talk about Kneejerk, I've already made the transfer despite this good start. Just a bit of corrective measuring, really, just to manage the loss of Barco and also the poor performances by the team of the player I have sold, who's Mikolenko. But yeah, there you go. I'm pretty happy. So yeah, let's hope it continues. But as I say in my caption, if you watch on YouTube, there's only one way it goes from here, which is down normally. What about you?
Well, not as good as you. So yeah, congratulations again, Tom. It's an absolute flyer of a start. So yeah, flying the flag for WGTA in the Content Creators League. Hopefully that will continue for quite a long time. And hopefully I won't be too far behind you either. So I'm off to what I would consider to be a pretty decent start too. I'm very happy with my game week 2 rank of 606k. Very little matters at this point. It's more about how close you are in terms of points, and the points difference is pretty fine at this point in time. But yeah, overall pretty happy with the setup. Raya 10 points in goal. Across the defense and in goal at the moment, I haven't had a blank so far, so that's quite cool. All 8 players that I've had represented in goal and in defense in the first 2 game weeks have all returned, so that's a lovely little start. Robinson claiming an extra bonus point at the end was also a nice surprise. Trent seems just ridiculously unfortunate not to get a return yet, but well, an attacking return at least, obviously getting the clean sheet points in both matches, so very promising there. And Bruno, we'll talk about Bruno later on, I'm sure, has been a point of frustration. But again, I put him in the Trent category of extremely unlucky not to get anything in the first 2 games. So overall, if I did say goodbye now, it would be with great hesitation. It's just the fact that he's 8.5. That's the only problem here. So there are just so many other options I can go to that are getting the returns as well as the data. So that's an interesting point of discussion. And Nkunku, frustrating, very tough call there. Really surprised he didn't start in game week 2, if I'm being honest, even after he played in Europe on Thursday. I really thought he'd come back in, but that is a dud pick, and I'll hold my hands up. That hasn't gone the way I wanted it to. I'm sure he comes back in and starts returning eventually, but there are just too many great assets in that Chelsea midfield at the moment, and João Felix coming in as well. It's just too cluttered in there to guarantee him 60 plus any given week. So got to be selling him, I think, or at the very least got to have a plan to sell him. Smith Rowe, Saka, Haaland, all very similar to you, so I won't go into them too much. Isak, frustrating, but whilst he hasn't exactly been fantastic himself, I think he's still good enough player that we can turn it around eventually on him. Armstrong, again, yeah, we'll come on to Saints, I'm sure, at some point. Very poor home performance. I think we had like 3 or 4 shots, 0.2 XG across the 90, very few chances created. The one that we did create did fall to Armstrong, but not really much to get excited about there. So, yeah, not an immediate sell, but one that I'll definitely be keeping an eye on and hoping that we find a way to lay it in front of goal for him in the next couple of game weeks. Overall, though, 85 points, not as good as you, but off to a decent start. Although I would say 1 or 2 more issues in my team than you've got. So possibly some transfers need to be made.
Yeah, there's definitely quite a lot going on at the moment. I mean, I think you've had a good start as well. I think that we'd both been happy being in the top million by game week 2.
100%.
I've just obviously had a couple of small moments go my way effectively, but I do definitely attribute a lot of the successes I've had to you. In fact, as I said last week, ending up with João Pedro, very much based on kind of you being very warm on him pre-season, and then I had a look into it and kind of came to the same conclusion as you did, and obviously David Raya, although yes, potentially Watkins should have, as I said in my bit, scored twice. he has returned 18 points in 2 games. I mean, that is way above expectation, isn't it, really? But overall, I mean, it's been a decent start. There's definitely something to build on for both of us. And if it's not gone as well, I saw Martin in the chat said that he's down to 3.2 million. I mean, there's so much of the season to go. That's why I'm not too high at the moment, and that's why you shouldn't be too low. And it's completely doable to turn it around. And I wouldn't be taking any conclusions from 2 weeks in, which is probably a bit of an awkward segue because that's what we're going to try to do. So looking at the Funzone mids. So the Funzone is something that in pre-season we defined as 5.5 to 7.5 million midfielders. But I think with the premiums basically all returning, we need to widen this an awful lot to basically 8.5s all the way up to kind of Bruno Odegaard level and try to encompass the entire gamut of the midfielders who are on offer. And as Sam said in his introduction, this is such an interesting spot this year in FPL because these are the guys who are going to be supplementing the performance of those premiums. And one thing we have maybe learned in inverted commas, or at least has continued from last year, is that premium is going to premium. A lot of the time there have been returns across the board for these premiums. And we're kind of seeing that players like Salah, Saka, even Son with the brace this week against admittedly a very kind of higgledy-piggledy Everton, are making a good value for their price bracket. Whereas there are a few issues on the line, aren't there, for these guys in the Funzone mid area. So, I mean, basically, if you're watching on YouTube and something that we'll kind of vaguely discuss on the screen, you can see that I've got the name of the player, the price, the FPL points so far, who cares? The ownership as of 10 a.m. this morning, and the XGI so far, who cares? And the next 6 on a 3-point FDR that I basically made up myself. So I've basically done what FPL do, except I've reduced it to 3 points rather than 5. I know 4, I think they've got 5, but they actually only use 4. Sam, as an Nkunku owner who also has Bruno and close considered Eze too, where are you on all of this? And why are people getting itchy feet, do you think?
Well, understandably so. So Nkunku owners, there were, I think, 17 or 18% of us coming into Game Week 2, down to 12 already. And I fear by the time this pod is over, it will be 10 or 11. Yeah, he's obviously going to be a sell for a lot of us. As soon as you've got a player at around 6.5 million who isn't starting games, that's far too much to be benching for any more than 1 game week. And you're going to need to find value elsewhere, I think. In my team in particular, I was relying on him being a regular starter. I do have 8 attacking players that I can happily play, but ideally a 6.5 is not a player that I'm able to really have on my bench week after week. So unfortunately he is a sell. This doesn't necessarily mean that he's never going to start a game again. Of course, I don't think anyone's suggesting that. It's more the fact that we don't know which week he will or won't start. And that makes him pretty much a dead option in FPL because you just can't have any sort of confidence as to whether or not you can back him in your team. So we're going to have to get rid of him. He's already had a price drop to 6.4. So that goes to show a lot of us have already sold him. He is actually still in my team. I haven't actually pulled the trigger yet. I wanted to wait until at least the end of this pod to come to my own conclusions and do my own research. But unfortunately, yeah, there are quite a few good options out there, either within $1 million up. So you can do maybe a double switch with that second free transfer if you rolled in game week 1, or as I'm sure we'll be talking about, a couple that are a bit cheaper that you can easily get to, save a bit of money, and then obviously bolster elsewhere, either this week or in the future as well. So yeah, plenty of good options. And Nkunku, unfortunately, looks like a spot that we'll probably have to run away from now. That doesn't mean he won't be an option later on in the season if he's consistently getting 80 or 90 again. But as far as we're concerned right now, he's just a no-go.
Yeah, it's such a volatile spot, isn't it? And rightly so, just because there are so many options of varying caliber, varying levels of pedigree and risk involved with all the different players you've got there. Like for every player like Nkunku, who is beset with issues, be it early subs, be it the fact they subbed on so late. I mean, it's just so disappointing. So I think we were both talking, weren't we, midweek when he did play against the vet, that we were thinking, oh, this is just him being tooled up a little bit, getting that match fitness back. And I don't think either of us were expecting the benching against Wolves, honestly.
No.
And you've got, so on one hand, you've got a player like that. On the other hand, you've got players like Eze and Bruno, who, as you've just mentioned, Sam, both of them performing very well in terms of the underlying data, or at least or in the eye test, which is crucially important right now, just because the data's a waste of time, basically. I pulled the XGI data from the FPL website, by the way, rather than FB Ref, in case anyone's wondering why there's a bit of a mismatch. But yes, it is definitely a time when you've got to weigh up that sense of patience. You know, if you're an Eze owner, you're seeing that maybe he's heading towards a drop. If you're a Bruno owner, you're seeing he's headed towards a drop. Maybe there's a case to hold on and just think, you know what, actually, I've just been unlucky here. Rather than in the case of Nkunku, it's more of a cut and dried sort of situation, isn't it, where that player kind of has to go. In your Nkunku kind of situation, you're sat there without any money in the bank, aren't you, if I remember correctly?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so what's the situation now then? Because you're looking at, especially with the price drop, it makes things very awkward, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does indeed. So yeah, obviously already down 6.4. It means the 6.5s are already inaccessible to me. Although I must admit, outside of maybe one or two of them, I wasn't overly keen on them, to the point where, okay, I'm ready to lock in a transfer last night before the price drop. I wanted to do more research and really have that strength and conviction of my opinions. So Gibbs White and Bailey were probably the two at 6.5 that I could have been persuaded into if there were no price drops this week. But I wasn't confident enough on either of them to immediately go there. So I think both of them are good options, by the way. Gibbs White looked pretty threatening against Southampton. I think it was 4 chances created, 3 shots, and I think 1 big chance in there as well. And has Wolves at home, who look at 6s and 7s at the moment. So yeah, don't mind that as a fixture. The problem is, though, after that, it's followed by Liverpool and Brighton. Again, that's probably not ideal. And Bailey, whilst in his own right a very good pick, Leicester away from home, Everton and Wolves both at home in the next 3. That's fantastic. But Villa will be going into Champions League after game week 4. Bailey's minutes historically have been fairly shaky, and they do have Philogene to come on that right flank. And I believe he's been guaranteed some minutes this season. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come back. So you would expect some rotation to occur there at some point. So those factors, fixtures on Gibbs White's side, on Bailey's side, more the minutes thing, have maybe put me off of those. But it does obviously leave me in a bit of a sticky situation with 6.4 for Nkunku, meaning I've got the 2 5.5s, or now 5.6 on this sheet I've already got. So Smith Rowe and Minte are both in my side. So that leaves a certain 5 million midfielder that is obviously going to be popular, unless I did something a little bit clever, let's say, in inverted commas, with Bruno as well, and maybe get a pairing of 7.5s and 7s together instead, and upgrading the Nkunku slot instead of downgrading it.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So I think in your situation, I think we can probably widen this a little bit to start looking at this in terms of price brackets, starting at the bottom. Now,
Yeah.
you've got Smith Rowe and Minte already, and both of those players would, I think, be high in mind if you did let Nkunku drop and you were thinking, okay, all right, where am I looking? So I think there are 3, those 2, and obviously Morgan Rogers.
Yeah.
And I suppose that, you know, with Morgan Rogers looking to potentially rise tonight as well, that is probably going to be where you go. But I mean, if you were, Sam, in a situation where you had to kind of pick one of the 3, I guess, and with Rogers having passed the ex-lively eye test, could have got 2 assists, and Watkins and that. I'm still thinking about that miss now, honestly.
Yeah,
last year that's in the back of the net. So maybe he's a little bit rusty, and the first game was very lively. I think, I don't think, from what Emery was saying, there's no way he's going to be anywhere near leaving the team, at least for the short term. I mean, if you had to kind of pick one of the 3 now, Smith Rowe, Minte, and Rogers, would you be going straight to Rogers, or would there be a consideration for Minte? I think Arsenal, so maybe not one for this week if you need a playing player. It's close to Smith Rowe and Rogers, actually, isn't it? If you were trying to choose between the 2.
It is close, and I think maybe because I've already got Smith Rowe, I've kind of put that one to one side. But I think if I was given the choice right now, I'd still be going for Smith Rowe first. The reason being, whilst Rodgers' minutes have been fantastic in the opening few, and he has been probably Villa's best player in the opening 2 game weeks, there is always that slight risk upcoming in the next couple of game weeks with minutes in mind. And at the end of the day, he is fairly new in the Premier League as well. So on top of that too, his data isn't exactly fantastic. Whereas with Smith Rowe, we know a little bit more about his pedigree at Arsenal. He's obviously been brought in as a big money signing, record signing, in fact, for Fulham. We've already seen how he's being deployed. It's very advanced. It's just off of Muniz as well. And Muniz is a player that gets a lot of small chances, but not as often gets the big chances. And if they are to fall to a second player, those would probably go to Smith Rowe now. And the 3 fixtures coming up without having to worry about Europe in Fulham's case, so minutes shouldn't be as problematic for Smith Rowe. Ipswich away from home, West Ham at home, Newcastle at home are absolutely fine. I think overall, I probably just about prefer Smith Rowe. Obviously, if you want to do something with that extra 0.6 million, then Rodgers is very, very close. But as Marcus says in the chat, his expected data isn't exactly outstanding. You would expect that to improve. He is a young player. He is being deployed in a more advanced role now. And just on the eye as well, it looks like returns are possibly coming quite soon, especially with the fixtures upcoming. But let's not get carried away. This isn't an 8-9 million asset who's getting 0.5 XGI. It's a 0.24, 0.28. So it's one in every 3 or 4 games on average. It could improve, and with those fixtures I expect it to, but he is a £5 million option, and that's really good value for money. If you can afford to rotate him a little bit as well, I think that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I think high in mind is a certain Cole Palmer here. Really, when you look at Rodgers, a lot of the time, I don't think people
He
are
does the
kind of making that
celebration.
connection. Yeah, people aren't making that connection quite yet, but I think we're all looking for that kind of cut price gem in FPL, aren't we? And that was kind of Pod 1. I highlighted the fact he was 5 million before I knew he'd scored, and I think Marcus pointed that out as well. Yes, you're right that there's definitely perhaps discouraging underlying data, but he's a very young player and he's made the step up to Villa. There's definitely kind of the ex-Lively versus the actual output, and that's kind of the barrier he's got to cross. But it sounds a bit sort of trite these days, but we always used to say fixtures beget form on WGTA, and maybe, you know, with the run that we've got in front of us for Rodgers, it's one of those where he is a punt worth making at that price. That would be the point that I would make. And plus, if you're an Nkunku owner, there's 1.4 million then freed up, and say, I don't know, Watkins against Leicester does convert the 2 chances he gets, and you don't really want Isaac anymore. Maybe, you know, I don't think that I agree with it. He's been stinking up FPL, as I've seen kind of people say a few times. But say he still doesn't quite look right against Spurs, then you've got a route to Watkins in game week 4 as well, from Isaac, plus a little bit more money left over on top of that. So I don't mind it. I started with Rodgers, so obviously I've got Rodgers in, and I'm more than happy for people to keep buying him and buying him and buying him, because then when he gets injured, invariably, or probably just before the Ipswich game week 6, I could sell him for 5.1, 5.2, which would be great. But yeah, I think that he's an absolutely fine kind of pick at this point. I wish at this point I would kind of start throwing in all the underlying data stuff from this season. We can't really do that at the moment. It's all about sort of supposing where it could possibly go. But with the run that's in front of him, as Sam just mentioned, you've also got kind of, it does kind of extend quite a long way effectively. And if he does kind of start to convert that liveliness into point scoring, you do have until sort of late October when he could be a fixture in your team. So at 5.0, I wouldn't really want to go without it, but it's fair. It's fine if you're not getting the hype. if you kind of look at it and just think, you know what, whatever, it's absolutely fine, because later on you can jump on if needed. You're not going to be too hurt kind of in the short term. You've got the international breaks between 3 and 4 when you can reassess the situation. But if he does do well against Leicester, a ramshackle Everton in game week 4, that may be the time when you're like, okay, maybe I've seen enough. Because if you have watched him over the last couple of game weeks, he has looked very good, and there wasn't very much separating that ex-Livy becoming FPL points. Should have got a couple of assists at least by now. So yeah, a really interesting one to kind of bear in mind. So the other side of it, Sam, then, if you aren't looking at selling Nkunku, but you are looking at maybe getting rid of Eze or Bruno. I mean, this is one where I'm not entirely sure that I'm behind it. If you start with Odegaard as well, potentially too, that could be one where you're looking around, casting around sort of the lower reaches, which I think takes us into kind of the rest of kind of the traditional fun zone between 6.5 and 8, I guess kind of 7.5, 7.6 in Jota's case. I mean, does anyone really stand out for you amongst this group? I mean, the immediate fixture, I guess, for the week just to come, you'd be looking at Bumo, wouldn't you, against Southampton at home? Sorry. But then he follows up with a little bit of a scarier kind of fixture away against City. And then there's a game against Tottenham the week after that, which is probably a little bit better, actually. I don't see that as a negative defensive game. But yeah, where would your eye be drawn if you were taking out of those two players? And would you be?
Yeah, so first of all, I think the key question is, would I be? And honestly, I wouldn't. The only way I'd be getting rid of Bruno as an owner this week is if I was probably going down to someone like an Eze, as well as possibly a Jota, who is the other player that's really caught my eye in the first 2 game weeks. So Eze, I think, is an absolute hold under pretty much any circumstances. If he was in my team, I would definitely not be getting rid of him. The data's been great, eye test wise as well, which is important from the first 2 game weeks. He's just been absolutely running the show for them. The fact he hasn't got a return is nothing more than just happenstance at this point, as well as just some really poor refereeing as well, which the referee himself held his hands up for. So fair play. He should have had at least 1 return by now, if not more. And the data probably doesn't reflect how good he's been as well. So Eze, for me, at 7 million on penalties, on set pieces, 90-minute man, good data. There's no way I'd be losing him, even against Chelsea away from home. I think that's an open game. There will be goals for both sides, almost certainly. I'm definitely not. I would definitely not be a manager selling Eze if I had him. In fact, I'm not a million miles away from finding a route to him this game week, despite the fact he's only blanked so far. So that is how hot I am on Eze right now. Bruno is possibly a very slightly different circumstance. The only reason for it is his price. It's 8.5, so you can downgrade, save some money, and get to other assets who are doing well, getting the points as well as the data. So Jota, Gordon, Diaz, and I would include Eze in that as well without the returns. So there is money that can be saved there. And you're also still getting a relatively comparable player for that less money, and hopefully bolstering elsewhere. That being said, though, I'm pretty tempted to just hold on to Bruno as well. I know Liverpool's not a great game. Liverpool, so on the ticker here, I think it's reversed in terms of home away. So I think Liverpool's the home game, Southampton's away in game week 4. I'm pretty sure Southampton play them at home, but that's by the by. I think the next 3 fixtures are fine for returns. The Liverpool game will be difficult because it looks like Liverpool are playing with a lot more control at the moment, but it's Bruno. He's on penalties. He, other than this game week, has been getting 90 minutes pretty much forever. So I don't really want to lose faith in him this quickly when all of those boxes are still being ticked and he's still putting up the data that probably suggests he's one of the most unlucky players in the league so far this season, for not getting a return. So it feels a bit foolish to get rid of him. That being said, if I did a double switch with Nkunku, then I could get to a Jota and an Eze, for instance, or something, some sort of combination there. So I don't mind that. In terms of the players around that price point, I would actively be looking at. Jota obviously has been very impressive. Gordon as well, I think, is a player I'm extremely interested in now as well. Tottenham at home, absolutely fine. Wolves away and Fulham away in the next 3. not a problem there. And because I'm looking at wildcarding ahead of game week 6 when they play Man City anyway, that's not really a problem for me. So, yeah, I think if I was ranking them right now, I'd actually probably put Eze out on top, followed very closely by Jota and Gordon, and then possibly Bruno just beneath all of them because of his price point.
I've got a freezing cold / potentially hot take on Bruno, which
Go
is
on.
that I think he's a bit of a Darwin in some ways. Like, we've had years of very good underlying data, but inconsistent
That's the
end
players
product.
around him, though, surely.
But it's true. But he's definitely a great player. But United have had substandard players for years. Those first 18 months or so were fantastic, but ever since that point, I have just found him an incredibly frustrating asset to own. Like, I'm sure he'll get back there, especially if there's a potent United production line forming. Like, speaking to your rejoinder there, with Xerxes, Hoyland, Garnacho, and even Rashford coming back to some sense of sharpness, we'll see. But it was always a wait and see with me with Bruno. I know that you weren't kind of swayed this way, but I know a lot of the analytics guys were, because obviously the underlyings are always fantastic with Bruno. They always are. But it kind of, I don't know. I don't know what it is with Bruno. Sometimes it's just that we've got quite a body of evidence now that maybe I look at him and think every time. No, Mike in the chat actually said he's due a haul. Like, when has that not been true over the course of the last 2 years with him? I might be wrong, and I'm not going to be that guy who goes, "Oh yeah, I'm never getting him back in my team." Yeah. Because as soon as he does start to kind of convert those the underlyings into output again, then hey, there I am. But we have seen underperformance for the last little while, and it may be attributable to the players that he's playing with, but equally, it does. I don't know. It's maybe that kind of introduction to life. He's not a bad asset. I'm not saying he's bad. 160, 170 points is great, honestly, and that's what he does tend to kind of net out at. I think maybe it's just because it was framed by that ridiculous 2021 COVID season in my head that. Since then he's always been kind of a mite disappointing around the premium sort of price point. This year he's not a premium, right? But it kind of feels like now he's in this sort of boom bust variance heavy sort of category. For me, with all that's going on with United, you look at it and just think, oh, I just don't want a part of that. But I mean, the proof's in the pudding. Proof's in the pudding. So I didn't buy the guy, but I completely understand those who did. But that's just kind of a bit of a one of those things I'll be monitoring. But from game week 8 onwards, right? They've got really, really good fixtures, pretty much all the way until February. I think they only play 3 top 6 teams on paper. They've got Arsenal, City, and Liverpool during that time frame. So there's a really long period where United have got really good fixtures around that. And I may well end up with Bruno throughout that and just hoping that kind of variance goes my way. But he does feel a very sort of variance heavy player. Whereas if you look at a player like Salah or look at a player like Saka, they're not as variance influenced almost. Like, you can bank on them producing points during a nice long run of good fixtures. With Bruno, you kind of can, but it's not got that level of trust almost from me anymore in him, if that makes sense. And maybe this is a qualitative point, a subjective point. But anyway, that's by the by. But there are lots of characters in the mix that you could kind of go to and from within kind of 6.5 upwards. To take the 6.5s, Matoma has already seen a rise after the forgotten man, I think, pre-season, really, Sam. 14 points thus far in the 2 games, has looked pretty electric, very, very, very good. Madueke, I think, will rise tonight, but if everyone saw the XG for Chelsea and the goals they actually scored, Gibbs White, I think one of those sort of steady eddies, great for a draft team and great for the first 3 fixtures. Fair play if you went there. And you've covered Bailey. The only one I'd kind of pick up on, I've added Savinho. I've included Savinho here just because I just quite like watching. I like watching him play. Yeah. I love the fact he's got Riyad Mahrez as squad number.
Yeah,
he's just a very, very cool player. There's no way in hell he's going to be playing with any sense of, consistency in the City team, but he's one of those who basically inherits Mahrez's mantle in more ways than one. Because if there is a double game week for City, or if there is like a one-off week for City before you wildcard or whatever, he's just one of those players that you're going to be like, yeah, you know what, this is a 1 week punt. I'm going to include him. Say I'll wildcard in game week 10, game week 9. Sorry, Sam, so against Southampton at home. I'm putting him in for that. But Szoboszlai, I think, would be quite cool as a potential pickup as well. Playing in the 10 for Liverpool, and quite a pure 10 almost as well. Nudging kind of 0.4, 0.5 XGI per game. Got the assist in the first game, but I think he could be a very decent sort of ticker throughout the year. I mean, this kind of 6.5 category, Sam, there's definitely kind of we're kind of waiting for someone to really put their hands up. But Mitoma does seem to be the current early front runner. I wouldn't be taking too much from the Madueke hat trick, would you?
No, I probably wouldn't just yet. Obviously, signs are positive, and Madueke did have a strong end to last season, so I'm not just disregarding the hat trick. It's definitely something he's got in his locker. But for the time being, he didn't play in game week 1. Obviously, came in, got 90 minutes in game week 2. You'd expect, because of that performance, he continues to get decent minutes for at least the next couple. But like I said with Nkunku, they've just got so many options there. It's only ever going to take one slightly poor or slightly below par performance before we start worrying about Madueke starting place again. So for me, unfortunately, it's just too much of a risk to go there. Mitoma, I think, would be the number 1 pick, and possibly still is, if it weren't for that Arsenal away fixture coming straight up now. Once that's out the way, the next 2, Ipswich and Forest, make him incredibly enticing. And he's not got, whilst Brighton generally have a lot of competition for spaces and for spots in that starting 11, Mitoma doesn't really have that quite as much down that left flank. You can play João Pedro out there, but Mitoma is the standout first choice in that lineup. And whereas with even right wing with Minte, you could argue that Adingra could come in at times. With Mitoma, you don't really have that quite as strongly. So I do like him as a route into Brighton. Obviously, the data's looking good. We know from past seasons how effective he can be, and he's, I think, 27 now, which really surprised me. This should be a big season for him. He's definitely going to have his eye on a standout marquee season to really not necessarily put himself in the shop window, but to make himself memorable and stand out from the rest. So yeah, I like Mitoma. This week, possibly not the week to do it, but I think he would be my standout pick. Gibbs White, obviously, is that steady Eddie. Quick word on Szoboszlai as well, actually, because I do like him. I think the only hesitation I would have is that Liverpool across the board look like they're going to have quite a few good options. And I don't know if I'd want to use one on Szoboszlai just yet. I don't know whether he'll be the points monster we need him to be to accommodate that third Liverpool spot just yet. He might end up being, and he might be really effective in that number 10 role, but I'm just not that confident just yet on him to go there and use a spot, a valuable Liverpool spot there.
Yeah, I think on Mitoma, there's one interesting point, which is more of a football point than an FPL point. They signed Brajan Gruda over the summer, which no one's going to know who he is. I do, because I had him on Foot Manager once.
He's more right winger though, isn't he?
Yeah, he is, but I think he can play both sides.
Okay.
And I think that maybe he'd be one that you, to Foot Manager, of course, but maybe he could be one that there is a bit of a succession almost, keying into your point there about where he could eventually sort of end up. Really, this is maybe his season where he should kick on, or maybe this is his apex, which is fair enough if that's where he wants to be. But that could be one that could be worth watching. The reality is that I agree with you on all those points. Effectively, there's definitely a lot of potential there, but it feels like at the moment you're not going to be moving to any of those players above a Rodgers or Smith Rowe almost, which sounds weird, doesn't it? It does sound very, very odd that you're looking at kind of slightly puntier players. With Rodgers, it is about the fixtures, and with Smith Rowe, it's kind of the ex-talisman where we're looking at, yes, okay, Muniz is getting lots of shots in the box, etc., etc. But Smith Rowe, my love of Smith Rowe. I'm not going to go into it too far. But with Smith Rowe, you're kind of hoping that with the fixtures as well, result in loads of points being scored. And I don't quite see it in 6.5s. Above that, though, obviously you said you keep Eze. You spoke about Boomer already. The likes of Maddison, who does look like he's slightly back to the James Maddison we know and love. Doing quite well over the first two couple of games for Spurs. Got the assist, I think, this week. Bowen, Mr. Dan Dyer, again, kind of going back on radar, looking very kind of up for it, infused as well. He's the captain now, I believe, at West Ham, which may kind of be the making of him. You never know. Luis Diaz, a character that we probably need to discuss, one who was roundly sort of ignored preseason just because Jota was looking like he's going to play the 9, but Diaz has done very well indeed this year. Looks pretty electric. And then Jota and Gordon, who are both fairly highly owned now. I did see that Gordon was nearing the circling the drain at one point on the price changes things, but actually he's kind of around kind of 70-ish. And I think the 10-pointer is going to stop that. Amongst those, Sam, and maybe there's somebody else kind of out there. Anyone you're particularly interested in, or at least kind of keeping an eye on going forward?
Well, you did mention Luis Diaz there, and I think he's an option that a lot of us did basically discard at the start of the season. His ownership's still under 10%. Obviously, the haul will bring him back into focus a little bit. I suppose my one hesitation with either Jota or Diaz is around the minutes now that Gakpo and Darwin are just around the precipice of getting decent minutes. I think they both came off on 71 minutes against Brentford. Whether or not that would happen if they weren't so comfortable in the game, I don't know. But it's certainly something that I am maybe a little bit wary of. And they're also in the market for Chiesa, I saw today as well, with talks being held at the moment. So he's another winger that could come in and potentially steal some minutes as well. Overall, I think my favourite option around that price point is actually still Eze. Like I said at the start of the chat, on penalties, on quite a lot of set pieces, looks so up for it on the eye at the start of the season. And the next 3 fixtures, 2 of which are at home, 1 against a promoted club, I'm absolutely comfortable with that as the pick. And if I am willing to get rid of Bruno this week as well, or find somewhere else I can downgrade a spot, then Nkunku up to Eze for even that extra 0.6. If I can find it, I really like that as an upside pick. So yeah, I think he's the standout option for me. I do like Maddison though. I just don't think the fixtures are there right now. I will have my eye on him when they turn again though.
I feel like that's kind of almost universal across these players, right? It's not so much that I'm trusting them to be fixture proof like a Saka. I'm looking at them as being players that I'm going to be moving to, and potentially also subbing out as the fixtures allow, especially this year where you can snowball your free transfers to such a huge extent. Even if you're wildcarding now, you're wildcarding with 2 FT if you haven't made one before, and that's huge. Really is huge. And we said that pre-season that's going to create a lot of interesting fantasy scenarios that we've never seen before in the past. And I think you're right that it kind of sounds like basically from where we are on this, and I think we need to move on soon. But the likes of Eze in the top bracket, even though it hasn't quite performed yet, should probably still be high in mind. And if not, we're moving off from Nkunku, especially ESR and Rodgers are probably the 2 places you need to be looking at very strongly. And just a couple of others, as Zaid said in the chat, that Garnacho is one to keep an eye on, which I completely agree with. I think we were saying last year that he looks, he's obviously incredibly talented, and has again not been that far from points. Especially because of a few refereeing calls. And Angel mentioned Semenyo as well.
Yeah, good shout.
One of those players who I think just kind of flies under the radar, but
Everton this week, right?
Yeah, Bournemouth fixtures are kind of a bit up and down, but nonetheless, I think he'd be one that maybe be looking at and thinking, well, I think it's game week 10 or 11, they start on a really good run. I think they've got kind of quite a tough run of fixtures from 4 till 10, I think it is, and then 11ish onwards, they're really good. So he'd be one as well that you'd be kind of keeping an eye on. But it does sound like Eze, ESR, and Rodgers are kind of the places we are kind of looking to kind of push towards at the moment. And I've got Jota and Gordon, and I'm likely to be keeping them both for the short term. Gordon, I'm less concerned about. I think he's just going to return over time. Like he's like talisman theory, basically.
Yeah.
He and Isaac were so close last year. They're basically co-talisman at Newcastle, provided there's no sort of move to Liverpool, of course. I'm more interested in that. And it sounds like the Chiesa link that you mentioned, Sam, may mean that Gordon does sign a new contract. Jota is always a constant monitor. I know that Dan in the chat said he just signed him. He's always going to be one you're keeping an eye on, and always one you're going to be monitoring, just because any given moment, given the fact that you've got Gakpo, you've got Nunez, and who are kind of challenging for that slot, it won't take very long. I didn't mean to make the pond slot there. But, you haven't got very long until maybe something does kind of go wrong. And plus he's Jota as well, so he's likely to get injured very soon, isn't he? But hey, got loads of money. Hopefully that he'll get another price rise before he does invariably get injured. But hey, there we go. Right, okay, let's move on to the old price point this week. So a bit of a observational moment. What have we seen from the FPL or Premier League? In fact, what have we seen in the football this week, which may sort of inform us when it comes to ongoing FPL decision making. Sam, what about you? What have you seen this week?
Yeah, so I'll keep it short and sweet this week, but I wanted to focus on Liverpool from a defensive point of view more than anything else. I thought it was really clear, not only in game week 2, but also across the first 2 game weeks, that they're playing a much more conservative brand of football, much more thoughtful in possession and their build-up play. And it's leaving them with much less exposure in behind on counter-attacks. So whilst last season and historically under Klopp, we know them as this all guns blazing, throw everyone forward and leave very little at the back and hope that Alisson can basically pull off the odd worldie here or there just to get them out of trouble. I think we're going to see a much better and stronger Liverpool defence across the season. I know the first 2 game weeks in terms of the attacking talent up against them hasn't been the best, but I think in terms of their shape and in terms of how they're playing Gravenberch as well at the moment, you would expect them to do slightly better on the underlying data across the season and keep a fair few more clean sheets. That being said, on top of that, they are still finding room for both Trent and Robertson to create plenty of chances. And Robertson was actually having a hand in not only chances created, but also getting in and around the box and getting on the end of chances as well. So I'm really not that adverse to the Liverpool defensive double up at some point if this were to continue. The fixtures continue to stay pretty tasty for a little while. And Robertson obviously was a factor in pre-season until he got that slight setback with an injury, I believe. And then we all kind of just forgot about him. But I think that combination could be very fruitful. If they do add maybe even 5 or 10% more clean sheets on top of their regular attacking returns that we usually see from a Robbo or a Trent, they could be game-breaking assets. So one to keep an eye on for the next couple of game weeks. I've already got Trent, extremely happy with that, but I've got nothing against adding Robertson to that list and potentially doubling up if they remain this solid at the back.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think he was definitely eye-catching when I was watching. That's for sure. So he's got 0.3 XG at the moment, which obviously one game, whatever. But it's notable that over the last few years, he's kind of averaged around 1.x, like 1.9, 1.8, something like that. So in one game, you've already kind of got, if this does continue, and there's a big sort of caveat to that, but if it does continue and he is part more kind of clearly as the end point effectively of Liverpool manoeuvres, then that could be potentially really, really interesting. And as you say, you've got one who in Trent who's perhaps the creator, but probably should have scored actually this week. I think that's a really interesting point and one that we should keep an eye on going forward, because not historically the best finisher. In my head, I can remember him missing quite a few bad kind of probably should have scored, mate, kind of shots in the past kind of 6-7 years he's been in Liverpool. But that's by the by. One of those players who has been in 200 club before, and probably we should kind of keep an eye on going forward. Mine is João Pedro, who I do already own. But I think it's generally a really interesting player to watch. So I didn't see the first game, but I saw the Man United game in detail. And it seems like a bit of a, in Football Manager parlance, bit of a roaming playmaker most of the time. He's basically just allowed to do what he wants.
Yeah.
Across the pitch, like he was popping up at left back, he was popping up in kind of right wing, like for a lot of the game, I was thinking, what the hell was going on? But it kind of, as I was kind of thinking about it afterwards, Sam, I was thinking, well, that kind of engenders a lot of managerial trust in this guy.
Yeah.
Like, he's clearly a very talented footballer, and he does seem to be kind of highly trusted by the manager. Hertzler described him in pre-season as one of those team leaders.
Yeah, that's big.
And as FPL Instinctive on Twitter pointed out, and I observed this in person not in person, but from watching the game on Saturday, the kicker is that he then moved into a finisher role towards the end of the game. The end state, Welbeck's withdrawn, and the game state around that is really unstable, which is obviously quite exciting because he's got 10-15 minutes against tired legs, and he seems to have that fitness and have that kind of acuity to be sharp for that 90 minutes. As we saw against Man United, although there was obviously some deficiency in nice defending. Woof. But generally, I was just very impressed with kind of how he was being used. I don't really put much stock at the moment in the prevailing idea that he is perhaps being challenged for minutes. Well, he's challenged for a start by the new signings. I'll be benching for Arsenal in game week 4, but Ipswich and Nottingham Forest home in game week 4 and 5 are very tasty looking right now as the revolution continues to pace. I'm obviously hoping that one of the new signings, to the point I just kind of fluffed, doesn't start to dilute those minutes or alter the role that he's playing. But at the moment, he is everywhere for Brighton, which is a good and a bad thing. But I mean, if you watch the last kind of couple of games, I've watched the first highlights, watched the second game, there are probably about 4 or 5 occasions where he could have scored points just from an assist, could have won a penalty, hit the post, all of these little bits and pieces. So I'm very interested in where Pedro is going to go. And as you said at the start of the season, when we saw the prices at 5.5, that seems quite undervalued really for what he could offer going forward. So I'm glad I've got him, and we'll see where that goes going forward.
Yeah, wish I followed my own advice now. Yeah, completely agree on all of your points. And I think the fact that he is the player currently staying on the pitch after all of those other assets are being replaced around the 70th, 80th minute mark is very telling as to how much faith Hertzler has in him as an asset. So yeah, really like him as a pick. Wish I went there from the start now. So yeah, completely agreed. Lovely.
Right, let's move on to the Game Week 3 preview. Here we go. So, usual, we've got the 4 things: the Kneejerk, the best transfers in, the bold claims, and the best captains. Kneejerk, we can't not, and Tina has just said it in the chat, wildcard drafts, please. So there are some wildcards being popped, so much so that FPL Statistics put out a warning last night. The estimates are going to be way off due to the activity. I'm not sure on the actual percentages at this time, but looking at my Twitter timeline, everybody is wildcarded, Sam. Everybody except us. But yeah, I mean, it is quite kind of endemic, I suppose, that you will see this kind of happen at some point where it feels like everybody's wild carding. I mean, Sam, what do you make of it? It kind of feels like, yeah, you're the captain of your own ship, aren't you? And you'll make the decision that's best for your team. But it feels like there are a lot of people who have gone there now. But is it kind of just that Twitter bubble thing going on?
I think it absolutely is, but it's also a wider point to social media in general. So in my day job, I work as a social media manager, and you do see the most extreme things rise to the top in pretty much any given day. And right now in FPL, a lot of us are trying to roll transfers or make fairly not boring moves, but fairly lined up moves of an Nkunku to a Rodgers, for instance. And it's realistically not that exciting. So that gets pushed to the bottom of the algorithm quite quickly and also repeated quite a lot. So on Twitter, for instance, what we are going to see, not just this week, but probably most weeks this season, is the most extreme version of the moves that could be made, or the most extreme thing that could be done in any given week, rise to the top and be spoken about the most, because at the end of the day, it's the most interesting and provocative topic to talk about. So this week it's on wildcarding. There might only be 1 or 2% of even the Twitter community actually pulling the trigger, but those are the most interesting things happening in the community at the moment. So of course they're the things that we remember seeing as we're scrolling, and the ones that are being replied to the most, so therefore rising in the algorithm as well. So it is really interesting to see. I think we'll see that a lot more this season than ever before, not just because the community is growing, but also because a lot of us will want to be rolling transfers in more weeks more often than not, and therefore won't have so much to say. So the discussion will be much more polarizing around the ones taking the more extreme stance. So in many cases, the wildcard will be the correct thing to do for some of you out there. But those of you right now thinking, oh, my team's okay, got 1 or 2 issues. Loads of people seem to be wildcarding. Maybe I should too. Just take a pause, really think it through whether or not it's just because it's what you're seeing online and you're being pulled along, or whether you actually have enough issues in your side that you can't manage with a 1 or 2 free transfers for now, and maybe managing another couple of issues later on down the line. And just remember that it is the most interesting and the most extreme things that we will see on social media each week. So I think it's only 1 to 5% of managers at most that are actually doing it.
Yeah, I think it's quite small. So, we could have put together a wildcard draft, and as Sam said, every week over the next few weeks, people are going to be wildcarding.
Yeah.
So, I think what was best to do was to put our feet, walk in the shoes of somebody who is actually wildcarding, and it was quite good because Nick of this parish is actually wildcarding right now, and he sent us through a voice note. Yes, it's one of those sorts of things where he's going to talk us through why he's wildcarded, and then we can look at his wildcard and kind of see what's going on with those wildcard drafts right now. Sam, can you play the voice note?
Of course. So I'll hand over to Nick. Hi, Nick. Hope all is well. And without further ado, here is his voice note.
Hiya guys, congratulations on another season of Who Got the Assist and your respective decent starts this year. My start hasn't been the best, unfortunately, but still had Haaland, so don't worry, I'm not crazy, but my team did have a number of issues, not least Nkunku and Garnacho not starting, Solanke being injured, Barco leaving Brighton. And whilst I owned Mo Salah and he started brightly, it did leave me a little imbalanced on the budget as well, with no Arsenal as an example. This means that I have actually pulled the wild card in Gameweek 3, which is the earliest I've ever done it. In goal, whilst Areola got me a clean sheet, he does have City next, so I've opted for Neto. In defence, I am keeping Konsa, Harwood, Bellis and Mazraoui, who came in for Konsa Gameweek 1, but am swapping out Gvardiol to Lewis to save an extra 1.5. And I'm also bringing in Saliba for Barco to get extra Arsenal defence cover. In midfield, I've actually made 5 changes. Out goes Salah, despite his excellent start. I'm looking to free up value. Nkunku, Garnacho, Winks and Gordon have all left as well. The new lads for me are Saka, Palmer, as Madueke felt a little bit too knee-jerky. Smith Rowe's come in as well, with Ipswich up next. I've also brought in Diaz, who started well as well, and that just frees up lots of money due to Salah being so expensive. And I've also brought in the budget pick, Morgan Rogers, for Aston Villa's run. And then in the forward line, I have kept Haaland, of course, but while Pedro comes in as a budget pick for Solanke, and I'm also looking at Isaac, getting rid of Isaac for Watkins, as I've got a 0.5 surplus in my bank. Let me know your thoughts. Cheers, guys. Love the pod.
Yeah, always good to hear from Nick, right? Always good to. I really should have told him to say it's tough, honestly. But I mean, it's definitely. I can see where he's coming from, Sam, because there are a lot more issues that he's been dealing with. No Arsenal, especially. I think that we were both sort of looking at that as a potential sort of early season fixtures play, and I think that if you are in the situation where you're kind of worried about the rolling higher ownership, especially of the defense, maybe you'd be kind of looking that way, even though there's Spurs and City in 4 and 5, etc., which is something you probably need to navigate with wildcard now. I think a lot of it kind of does make sense. I'm not too sure why Nick's gone with Neto though. Overall at the back, that seems a bit bizarre. But yeah, it's a solid wildcard, honestly. I think that replacing Isaac with Watkins does feel very now. For example, using Luis Diaz as a Salah sort of swap over kind of also works given the recent production, and then having Saka and Palmer makes a lot of sense as well. So I think it's fine. As you can tell by my intonation, I'm not really too sure about a few of the picks, but as I said, everyone is the captain of their own ship. The likes of Lewis and Neto wouldn't be high in mind for me, but everybody else, Robinson at the back, Saliba, Smith Rowe, Saka, Luis Diaz, Rogers, Palmer, Haaland still retained, Watkins, and João Pedro. All of those picks make absolute sense to me. It all kind of feels like it's being set up quite nicely for the next few weeks. On the selfish side, it doesn't look too different from the team that I've got. So, I'm not too concerned. I am concerned about not owning Palmer, though. That does seem like potentially the nub of the reason to wildcard in some ways, because you can take out Salah and do that sort of surgery in your team, perhaps, which those who aren't wildcarding right now, the 95%, the majority of people who are not wildcarding right now can't possibly do. I mean, does it make sense to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I do like the attack here in the sense that he's basically got 4 or at least 1 proper premium with 3 other kind of cut price premiums in Saka, Palmer and Watkins. And I don't think you'll see any teams out there with all 3 of those in the next couple of game weeks. I mean, you'll probably see 1 or 2 somewhere, but they will not be highly owned as a combination. So I really like that. Most people who haven't already got Palmer are struggling to get there without selling Saka right now, for instance. So I do like that. There are 1 or 2 individual picks I probably wouldn't myself recommend. So Neto, like you hinted at, I don't think he's actually going to keep his place for much longer, because it looks like Kepa is actually on the verge of signing for Bournemouth, which I did not have on my bingo card at the start of pre-season.
No, absolutely not. Is it the most expensive goalkeeper in history?
Yeah.
With all due respect to Bournemouth, I mean, wow.
Well, Sandbanks is lovely, and it is near to Andy Martin, so I can't really fault it. That would be a good place to go down.
More time with Andy down the slot, down the coin machines.
100%. Bournemouth's a lovely place in the world, and Sandbanks, you'd imagine he lives down there, probably near Harry Redknapp as well. So yeah, you're loving life. But Neto, I think, is likely to lose his place. There's no way Kepa's been signed with no guarantee of minutes. So I think that one might be an issue. Lewis, whilst I really like for now, I just don't see a world where Walker doesn't come back in eventually. Unless he literally leaves in the next few days, I think that place is very short term. But I don't want to dive too deeply into every single one of these picks, because Nick is the one thinking this through. I haven't done the thinking on a lot of them personally myself, so I'm sure he has his own reasoning for many of them that obviously he's not here to defend himself on. The only other pick I'd probably just mention, as if you are wildcarding out there this week and you're looking for the next few, Nedeljkovic, I'll probably butcher that, but I'm hoping I've got that right. Aston Villa looks pretty likely to play at right back at 4 million for the next month, because cash is out, and Emery has been upping Konsa's minutes as a centre back, or his chances as a centre back. So there's a decent chance that Nedeljkovic gets the right back berth for a little while. And honestly, I just don't think Southampton are keeping pretty much any clean sheets this season by the looks of it. So Harbour Bellis might be good for a goal once in every blue moon, but take a punt on Nedeljkovic for a few weeks maybe, and it might work out.
Yeah, you're right. This is obviously highly provisional from Nick. He's not locked it in and walked away. So there's definitely a few things that are going to change. But yeah, I think that you're kind of, if you're wildcarding now, it feels a bit of a catch-up play a lot of the time. If you've bench boosted in game week 1, you kind of got through game week 2, then maybe it's kind of similar almost. You're kind of building towards just looking forward. I think that's what's really key if you're wildcarding now. That's kind of reality always when you wildcard. There's a few things that you're looking at right now, which are obviously really important just to maybe sort of cover, but it's got to be some sort of long-term focus that maybe even this week it doesn't really kind of work for you. But going forward, it's one of those things that you need to just make sure that, even if a player does have a dodgy fixture this week, like a João Pedro, who Nick has included, that you've got that sort of necessary cover in place. And those few gems, like Sam's mentioned, the Delkovic, could well be sort of that avenue, a little bit of an enabler to make things sort of work. Marcus in the chat just said that wildcard before an IB feels risky. Yeah, I agree with that. I wouldn't have been doing it this week, but you're the captain of your own ship, basically, and that's the reality of it. So, no, fair play. I think there's going to be a lot of wildcard sort of templation and kind of wildcard sort of here is the best wildcard, etc., going on. I think the reality is, as long as you are reasoned, as I said before, game week 1 with the picks that you make, and you're happy with the picks that you make, then fair play, and you're able to kind of go forward with 2 free transfers in the bank as well, assuming you have made a transfer in game week 1. I think it's fine. It's absolutely fine. But I'm talking from a position of having had a decent start. So, you've got to do what's right for you at the end of the day. And I think that seems absolutely fine, really, for the next few weeks. Cool. Yeah. All right. Kneejerk for us. Where are we with all of this? So, I've kneejerked already. I have made a sell. And Sam, I've been so exciting. Honestly, you're going to fall off your chair.
It seems exciting.
Fall off your chair. I've done Mikolenko to Konsa.
Oh,
I'm going to give you a second just to absorb that.
That was good. Yeah, that was worth it. Yeah.
So Mikolenko was dropping. It felt like he was like a really poor preseason sort of final hour reshuffle rooted pick. One of those players that you kind of get in. And I mean, he was basically going to be covering for Munoz away at Chelsea this week. He's got Bournemouth at home, and obviously it's hard to legislate for Brantford not being fit, a makeshift defence. Ashley Young getting sent off. Why? No. I should have just been kept it simple and just put Konsa in from the beginning. So a bit of a corrective sort of pick almost there. So even if Villa's defence was a bit ropey last year, they've got the fixtures and Onana's now there to protect that back line. It just felt like the right thing to do, really, this week. Review also did say that was the best pick to do. But that wasn't the main sort of... that wasn't the first thing I looked at. It was kind of, right, I really wanted Robinson, for example, but I knew I was making a transfer on Sunday night. I know that Fulham have got midweek game. So I was just thinking... right, what's the safest transfer I can make, especially thinking I can keep it simple, stupid? Well, I think probably it's going to be Konsa or Powell, and I review kind of fancied Konsa, so I was like, okay, I'll go there. I said pre-season that I thought that his price at 4.5 was very good, and slightly, I think he did kind of have a header on target in the first game. No, that's nonsense as a reasoning, but I think he kind of just makes sense just to bring in. So that's where I've gone. That's the knee-jerk for me. The other knee-jerk that I was kind of I spoke to Praz on Twitter before Gordon scored, and I was saying, Gordon and Isaac, Watkins and Eze is right there, and that could be a move that I do make in the future, honestly. But I think that obviously Gordon did a goal, but the reality is that as we'll see in the bold claims, I think that I always wanted to keep my double Newcastle attack for Spurs at home.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's I've knee-jerks. I've knee-jerks in game week 2. I don't know if it's a knee-jerk or more of a kind of like, well, first few weeks of the season, if there's no midweek game and you want to just avert a price drop on the player you don't really want anymore and bring in another one who strengthens your squad, I think I'm fine with that, honestly. So yeah, that's what I've done.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really fault it. The review keeps telling me to get rid of Hall for Konsa as well, and it might be something I end up doing. But yes, I don't know. So, something about Konsa just feels very low impact to me, but maybe that's a good thing.
It's boring, isn't it? It's a boring player to bring in, but I think he's just like one of those players you can happily play for the next 4 games. Or if he's on your bench, you're not going to be too upset about the fact he's on your bench, right? Just I have Mikolenko, who I've got no trust in that player. And I think with what's going on with Palace at the moment, I'm probably going to be fielding Munoz in game week 4. Well, definitely because he's got Leicester at home, whereas Porro's got Arsenal away. Game week 5 against Man United. I mean, let's see. it gives me a couple more options, and maybe just maybe staves off me needing to wildcards until a little bit later on in the season, which may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing. You never know.
Yeah, absolutely fair enough. Konza is a solid, steady Eddie pick. And like you say, if you're going to knee-jerk on someone who's not got a midweek game, who is usually fit and plays 90 minutes, there's very little or much lower risk than normal with a pick like that. So yeah, can't fault it whatsoever. It's definitely a sensible play. I think for what it's worth, you've been slightly unfortunate with Everton at the start of the season. Obviously, they've turned out to be getting off to a pretty rotten start, but the data and everything we saw at the back end of last season suggested that actually maybe they weren't that bad at defense, and maybe there was potentially some good outcomes on the horizon for them. So I don't think you can call Mykolenko as a pick a bad one in hindsight. I think it's just not worked out the way you wanted it to. So yeah, now with Konza's fixtures looking good from this point on, it makes all the sense in the world. I can't fault it whatsoever.
It's a very tiny violin, isn't it, of all the things I've been unlucky about this year.
Yeah, it's hard to feel sympathy.
What about you? Any knee-jerk reactions? I guess you've kept Nkunku, so you've kept your knee in check.
Yeah, so if I was knee jerking, and obviously I was close to last night, if I was going to sell Nkunku, it probably would have been for Rodgers immediately to make sure that I kept that 1.5 in the bank as it happens. And one of the preseason lessons that I'm trying really desperately to hold on to even tonight with Rodgers looking like he's going to richardson is to wait for more information wherever possible. Yes, Rodgers doesn't have a game. He does have training though. And Richarlison found a way to get himself injured in training last time. I did an early move. So, and also another thing that often gets forgotten about is other players in your team could also then go on and get injured during the week. So because I'm not absolutely desperate for that extra 0.1, and because my future moves over the next couple of game weeks don't depend on it, I'm probably going to hold off a little while from now. I could be tempted to do it tonight if I get a bit knee jerky after this stream, but I think I'm going to hold on. If I was going to knee jerk in another direction, it would be to remove Bruno. And I think that's the more important one to talk about. Yeah, but as we've discussed with Bruno, very, very unlucky not to get anything. But you make a very good point around who he's playing alongside and the fact that he has been underperforming for a good couple of seasons now. So maybe it's more than just the data that I need to be focusing on here. Maybe it is the team around him. And when there are other options for 1 million less that I can get to and also sort out the Nkunku issue and effectively get 2 better players in their place, it is quite tempting to do so. It's just using that second free transfer now makes it more difficult to make a double switch in a couple of weeks when I'll likely want to get to Salah by game week 5, for instance, or a Watkins, or in fact both. So it's tempting to knee jerk. I might yet do it if I lose faith in Bruno, but for now, I think I'm going to keep my knee in check.
Let's just say, if I were you, I'd be doing Nkunku to Morgan Rodgers tonight. If Rodgers is rising, which it looks like he might be, I'd be just thinking, you know what? Like, if I'm getting Rodgers in and I'm convinced that Nkunku's rubbish, then I just do it and just kind of hope that there's a very small chance a player gets injured. And the reason we remember those players getting injured in training is because it happens so infrequently. And I'd just be thinking, you know what? I'm just going to do it for getting a little bit more, getting a bit of squad value, just getting that done. And yeah, I go for it. But I mean, you're obviously,
like the devil on my shoulder right now.
Yeah, I know. But I just do it. Frankly, I'd have done it last night if it was me, because I did.
Yeah, I know you would have. Yeah, I know.
I just made a decision, gone with it. But that's the way that I think. And maybe there's a pod in that as well about maximizing versus satisficing, which we should talk about at some point in the future.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I decided that I want to get rid of Nkunku, and I thought that Rodgers was the guy, and if he's rising tonight, then it just gives me a little bit more. It's a butterfly thing, right? So like over the next few weeks that you've got even 0.0 zero point 0.1 more effectively to play with over the next few weeks because you've already lost 0.1. So I'd be doing it now rather than potentially losing 0.2, 0.3 if Rodgers does kind of kick off over the next kind of couple of weeks. But that's me. So see what you decide. Right. Move on. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, I guess the final thing I wanted to say on that is it's because I'm not completely sure that that's the move I want to make yet.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it?
Because if I do sell Bruno as well, I could get to an Eze and a Jota. And I think a lot of it hinges on, do I trust Jota for another 3 weeks, or am I just too late to the party? What would you say to that very quickly?
Yeah, Jota's a week by week kind of look. I'd be keeping the 1 free transfer back and just doing Nkunku to Rodgers because for me that feels like obvious almost. So that would have been
3 midfielders under 6 million then in my team.
Doesn't matter though, because at the end of the day we've just kind of looked at the midfielders and gone, right, okay, Smith Rowe, Rodgers, and maybe Eze are the 3 that we'd be going to right now. I think values, obviously, price is very important at the start of the season, but after a while, it does kind of give way to just value. Maybe that's not going to happen quite yet, but you have not 1.4 million in the bank, and you can make that move from Isaac to Watkins. Not that you won't be able to if you leave Rodgers at the end of the week when he's 5.1. But I mean, there's definitely unintended effects going forward. So if you don't make the move tonight, say a wildcard in game week 6, you'll be 0.1 million off. You could be 0.1 million off the team you want, and that might be just because you've hesitated tonight. Who knows? But one of those where I'd be looking at things going, yeah, all right, I kind of made my decision. But if you haven't made your decision on Rodgers being the best pick, then that's slightly different. For me, I'd just be thinking that Nkunku's Rodgers is obvious, but that's my perspective. It's not necessarily yours. It's not necessarily me saying that that's obvious for everybody. It's just how I'd be looking at it.
Yeah.
But I completely appreciate why you'd be hesitating because you may have other things. I quite like, what you were saying about what you could do if you did remove Nkunku and Bruno in one fell swoop, because the game against Liverpool, I don't know, it's one of those, isn't it, where you look at it and you think,
it would be typical Bruno, wouldn't it? I don't even need to finish that sentence. It would be typical Bruno.
He's always been due a haul, Bruno. But it's one of those where like Darwin. It's one of those where I need to be convinced now, and that's where I'm always going to look at it.
Fair enough.
Cool.
Sorry,
all right.
I'm not done with my therapy session there.
That's all right. Right. Best transfers in.
Cool.
So a lot of activity going on at the moment. Later on in the season, we're always kind of like, 50,000 managers are bringing in this player, blah blah blah. This week, wow, the numbers are ridiculous, Sam. Honestly, Madueke done a hat trick. Over 500,000 managers have brought him in. Smith Rowe, that crept up from last time I looked at this at 10 a.m. when Smith Rowe was a top brought in player. And again, 500,000 managers in for him. Welbeck, 429,000 managers in for him. Haaland, those people have seen enough and decided that if Haaland wasn't too expensive for them in game week 1, now is the time to bring him in. Almost 400,000 managers brought him in, and then Palmer, 496,000 managers brought him in as well. Lots going on there. Watkins, Carlos in the chat, a question I will go back to in a second, said about bringing him in. Watkins has been brought in by kind of just 96,000 managers. Doesn't sound like it sounds like a lot, but at this time of the season, it's actually not that much. I think he's just at the bottom of the first page of transfers in. On the other side, transferred out, Isaac stinking up FPL after just a paltry assist after being reduced to 10 men. And I think probably should have got an assist at least last week as well against Bournemouth. And Slanky being sold by around sort of 430,000. That makes sense because I think that Ange mentioned the international break. It does make you think, probably he's not going to be back until game week 4. A couple of tough fixtures for Spurs. Foden and Nkunku and Eze all being sold off for different reasons. Foden, just because I think he missed last game, might be a bit ill. Nkunku, a good sell. I think we can both get behind that one. And Eze sold because he hasn't done any points, Sam. So
very heavily.
I disagree with that completely. So Carlos in the chat said that if Watkins goes down in price, I've got exact money to get him for Isaac. do you think with his fixtures it's worth him still? And I think that that's kind of quite a good kind of springboard for this transfer section because there's loads going on. I don't know about this one because we'll see in Brawl Claims, I've got Newcastle Spurs being an absolute goal fest, but
Yeah.
I don't really understand why Watkins is being sold so heavily. I don't really get that because the fixtures are so good. He's literally been the sixth most sold. 300,000 managers sold him. He might be down to 8.9, as Carlos mentioned, very, very soon. I don't know. That's a tough one, isn't it? Isaac versus Watkins, selling Isaac for Watkins. I don't know. I wouldn't be doing it if it was me. I could have got there this week, for example, by the Gordon move I mentioned, or taking Mikalenko down to a 4.0. What's your view on that one?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things going on with both of these players, actually, that makes it quite an interesting call. So I'll start with Watkins. Now, obviously, didn't really get any preseason, didn't play any minutes in preseason, came straight back in and played the hour in game week 1, got just over the hour in game week 2 as well. So it's very clear at the moment that they're building up his minutes and they're building up his fitness. Now, that would obviously lend itself to the belief that, okay, he'll get back up to 80, 90 minutes every single week and he'll be absolutely fine pretty soon. But we've only got one more week before the international break. Whether or not he gets 70, 80 minutes before the international break, I think is risky enough to say the least. So straight away, I wouldn't be bringing him in this week personally. I also wouldn't be selling him, in fairness. If I had him now, I'd hold on to him. But I wouldn't be selling Isaac this week, full stop. In terms of Watkins as well, there is a second factor that I think has been largely overlooked, and that is that Duran is staying. So I do think that Duran's been given some sort of word in his ear or guarantee of minutes at some point this season. Whether or not that's just in Europe, I honestly doubt that that's been what he's been told, because it's Champions League and Watkins is going to want those Champions League fixtures. So that only kind of leaves the Cups and Premier League football for Duran to get some minutes in. So I do think that actually more so this season than last, we could see Watkins coming off a little bit earlier. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be 60 minutes every single match, because he's far too good a player for that to happen, but we could see him come off around the 80-minute mark a lot more often this season, or playing a 2 with Duran at times. So that's another factor to consider. I wouldn't be buying him or selling him this week. I think whatever you have on Watkins, you wait. After the international break, I expect him to be back up to full fitness, because he's had another couple of weeks there. Probably won't start games for England, so he'll probably be fine. And then game week 4 would be the first time that I would personally consider buying him, especially if you're selling Isaac. I think Isaac at home to Spurs is an absolutely fine game. Their defensive data last season was pretty poor, so there's just no way I'd be getting rid of him at the moment. I think it's far too soon for me. So yeah, I understand why people are getting a little bit twitchy on Isaac, and I also understand the volatility on Watkins in both directions. But for me, I think it's just as it was. Just leave them be for now, and then game week 4 we can make a much more well-informed decision.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I'm not sure I'd be selling Isaac ahead of the game against Spurs. Honestly,
No.
I can't get behind that one iota. It was always a game that I was thinking, right, okay, Southampton, see what happens with Bournemouth and the Spurs. I'm going to hold them for that free and see what happens after that. Because yeah, that game against Spurs, 2 teams that struggle defensively but have got very, very good attacks, and we'll see in the bold claims in a second. I'm backing that to be a big thing. I don't. We both discussed Eze already. I'm not sure that I agree with that sale, and if it does go down to 6.9, I think that could be suddenly a very interesting pick again. On those players that, if he does go down, you do own him, you are worried about the drop. I'd just be thinking, you know what, I'm going to make the money back eventually,
back up,
because he will make that back up.
He
may not, but he's definitely got that kind of endemic talismanic quality to him that you wouldn't be too worried. But yeah, I mean, a lot of this is still mostly because he did the goal or because he did something. Madueke being on top of it is kind of yeah, it kind of tells you what you need to know, really. And that Haaland being the fourth most bought in. I mean, really, are you surprised by this? I suspect he may ramp up quite a long way. Even though there's Arsenal game week 5, I suppose one of those players that now is really kind of positioning themselves as just the season, just leave him in there unless he gets injured, honestly. But yeah, interesting. Right, bold claims this week then. Last week it wasn't great.
No, we fluffed our lines, let's say. So I went for Armstrong to bag 2 returns. That was very optimistic. But also, as a Saints fan, you got to go for it at least once or twice a season. Did not work out in any way. He didn't even get 2 shots, let alone 2 returns. So yeah, unfortunately not. And yours didn't work out either, did it, Tom?
Nope, not at all. So Doku outscoring Haaland, more of a just a bit of a punt really on the bold claim. Just because sometimes in those fixtures you see the little guy outscoring the big guy. Maybe I should have gone with Savinho, who I spoke about earlier on, being the guy who outscores. But hey, yeah, I think we're kind of both happy with the Haaland haul. Really there. How is up this week?
Yeah, so I don't think you've seen my one for this week yet. I am obviously clean sheets have been pretty decent so far this season. As I mentioned, it's been high scoring points across most of our defenses. I'm claiming that it will go the other way this week with no clean sheet for Arsenal, City or Liverpool in our back line. So that's my bold claim. No clean sheet for any one of those 3 teams.
No, fair play. And I've got 5 goals or more in Newcastle versus Spurs. Like, it's one of those games that I'm really looking forward to, just as a neutral, as someone who's just watching the Premier League. I think that game is going to be goals galore. Like,
take that to the bank. Yeah,
I really, unfortunately, I'm going to be driving to Cornwall at that point. Yeah, I really would have loved to watch that game. It's one of those where you see it, it's got free written all over it as far as I'm concerned. There's nowhere in hell I'm selling any of my players for that game. I'm playing all 3 of them. I've got Porro, Gordon and Isaac, and I just would not be surprised if that game turns into a goal fest, because neither team can defend really. Well, they can defend, but you know what I mean. And both teams have got really potent attacks. So I think that's going to be a game where you've got 2 managers who are both kind of attack minded, and it's going to be very, very exciting, that game. I'm really sad to be missing it. Cool. All right. Final thing. Best captains for this week. I think it's definitely a really interesting one this time around. There's a bit of a formatting error here, but you had I didn't mean to put the unicorn signifying Saka, if you watch on YouTube, as being the 3rd pick. I think you've got the robot Haaland, obviously away at West Ham last year. Away at West Ham, scored I think 2 years ago he scored a brace, didn't he? I can't remember what he did last year. But for me, it's one of those where, yeah, I think I'm going to default to him. Salah versus United, though, has a ridiculous record. Loves putting them to the sword. And Saka versus Brighton, we need to see how Hertzler is going to adjust to playing an elite attack. Interesting one, isn't it, Sam? I mean, where are you currently swaying?
Well, I've got Haaland and Saka. I don't have Salah, obviously. I think even if I did, I would still probably be on Haaland. I think that is just about the best fixture of the bunch. I think Brighton have looked pretty decent defensively overall, and Hertzler is known to be a fairly cautious manager in the bigger games. So while Saka is a good pick objectively, I don't think it's enough for me to captain him necessarily, although Saka and Arsenal have looked potent already this season. So not a terrible outside pick there. Salah versus United, we know he's got a great track record. We know that United are still not exactly solid at the back, but Liverpool are sharing their goals around a little bit so far this season. And I think that's a trend that will probably continue this week. And with all of that put together, Haaland is a very, very strong talisman for Man City in a team that are looking like scoring quite a lot of goals already, with De Bruyne firing, Foden probably back in. It just looks like they're ready to steamroll opposition already. So yeah, I'd be very tempted to just go with Haaland again this week. It seems like a case of not overthinking it in my team, because I don't have Salah. if I did, it'd be more of a difficult decision, I think. But I think I'd still just about favour Haaland.
Yeah, so Mo Salah against Man United has the most goals of any team he's faced, and he's got the most goals against them in the Premier League throughout his career. So it's 11 goals in 13 games. Obviously, know what he's done in the past, and I'm very, very much been hiding behind the sofa and hoping that Jota can actually score one of those bloody chances that comes his way against United. And yeah, I'm on Haaland again as well. Personally, I don't think it's quite got to the point where the season is a Haaland auto caps, but the next two, absolutely. Arsenal in 5, whatever. Game week 6, they've got Newcastle away, so maybe there'll be some other option on the table, and probably Saka versus Leicester for me if I don't wildcard them. But then after that, you've basically got wall-to-wall Haaland all the way until November, effectively. And so I'm glad I've got him, and I think I'd just be keeping it because, as you said, the machine, the steamroller, the juggernaut keeps rolling on, doesn't it? Lovely. How we set up for this week then?
Right then, so my team's on screen first. Probably not an optimal setup this week, considering Nkunku is still in my starting 11 as it stands. But as we've discussed, probably sorting that out either tonight or very, very shortly. Raya starts in goal at home to Brighton. Back 3 is Robinson away at Ipswich. Very happy with that. Trent, who's been absolutely fantastic so far this season, and Porro against Newcastle away from home. Like you mentioned, Tom, I'm not expecting a clean sheet there, but he's got decent underlying attacking data and he's been getting forward a lot. So hoping to spike some sort of attacking return there. And it's not like I can rely on either of my other defenders to get anything, considering Hall has now been benched and Barco is in Spain. So hopefully he's enjoying the weather, but he's not enjoying my FPL team at the moment. In midfield, I've got Saka as my vice. Smith Rowe against Ipswich away from home, very happy there. Bruno and Nkunku. Nkunku's got to go. Bruno might go, as I've discussed, but only if it significantly strengthens the duo of those two positions, Bruno and Nkunku, rather than because I necessarily want to get rid of Bruno in his own right. Up front, I am starting with 3 up front again as it stands. Isak and Haaland captain, and Armstrong away at Brentford gets another crack at it over Minte, who is on my bench away at Arsenal. If Minte had even a slightly better fixture, I would probably start him ahead of Armstrong. But Arsenal away from home at the moment, you've got to back a clean sheet there, let's be honest. So Minte stays on the bench. Armstrong, good luck. You're an Avenger now. So yeah, goal, assist, double digit haul. That would be great. Thanks, mate.
Yeah. It might be a while before you come back to them as your bold claim for the week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame. All right, and here I am. I'm fairly happy with my team for this week. Yeah, a lot of similar players to you, with the Raya in goal, etc., and so on and so on. New signing Konsa and Rodgers, who's been biding his time on the bench, comes in against Leicester City, which I'm very happy about. Captain Haaland, bench João Pedro this week to let Rodgers come in next week. There could be an interesting bench dilemma going on. Where the hell am I going to go with all of that next week? We shall see then. I'm pretty happy with what I've got, really. I think it will just be a case of hoping it's all right on the weekend, really. So Munoz initially, who was going to play, been replaced by Konsu, who came with Mikalenko. But yeah, pretty solid, and just hope that I continue on this week. I don't think there's any kind of. I think Cole Palmer is probably the key worry for me this time round. Who knows where it's going to go going forward, but I think it will be kind of Cole Palmer against Palace, but I'm going to be kind of hiding behind the sofa. Salah versus Liverpool too. So yeah, I'm actually quite glad now I'm driving on Sunday because I don't want to be watching that game. I'm just hoping that Jota does manage to score one of the 2 potential chances he seems to keep getting every now and again. Lovely indeed. And that actually wraps us up for the Game Week 3 pod. Hopefully you've all enjoyed listening along, and obviously keep track
with us on social media to see how our moves end up this week. It looks like Tom's pretty locked in. I do have some decisions to make. So do make sure you go and follow us over on X at WGTA_FPL or myself at FPL Pricey. On Instagram or Threads, it's WGTA.FPL, or again, just FPL Pricey on there. If you did enjoy the pod, if you could please follow us on those socials, but also give the pod a 5-star rating on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you're listening, that would be fantastic. Or, of course, if you could leave a like on YouTube, there's currently just under 70 of you watching live. So if you could leave a like, that would be greatly appreciated. And, of course, subscribe if you want to catch us again next time. All of those things really do help us out quite a lot.
They do indeed. Hope you enjoyed the pod. Hope it's just you think more about the Funzone mids. I'm on holiday next week, as I mentioned earlier on. And it's international break, so we might have a week off, and about the week after, we'll see how it's going to go. See if I'm able to convince my other half that we bring a microphone, if we've got enough to talk about for 2 pods. But either way, we'll speak very, very soon. Speak to you soon.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist?